All right, folks, welcome to Grown Up Product. So there's a bit of a dirty secret about scaling a B2B SaaS company. Getting to 10 million in ARR is definitely hard, but it's a very different kind of hard than what comes after it. The playbook that got you to product market fit, the founder-led sales, the custom implementations, the we'll build you whatever you need mentality is often not going to be very helpful as you go on the path towards 100 million. 80% of venture-backed SaaS companies actually never get past the 30 million mark in ARR. They stall out somewhere around that messy middle, stuck between startup chaos and real scale. And when boards and investors go looking for answers, they usually look at product. My guest today has been one of the people they call. Meraj Imani is a product executive and a fractional CPO with 15 years of experience scaling B2B SaaS organizations across North America and Europe in fintech, health tech, and industrial tech. He's helped companies grow from early traction to over 80 million in ARR through multiple acquisitions and into category leadership. At Enable, he was recruited by the co-founder as their first product leader with a mandate to reset product vision, strategy, and how product was built and delivered. He took them from bespoke, services-heavy implementations to a scalable SaaS model, introduced their first AI-powered analytics capabilities, and scaled the product organization from a small team of business analysts into a global, multidiscipline team. Today, we're talking about that sequence, what a product leader stepping into a $10 million ARR company should actually think about, and in what order. Raj, welcome to the Grown Up Product.
Awesome. It's great to be with you, Brian. Happy to try to share some of the lessons that I've learned over the years and, things that you go to school, you don't really learn about them. There's a lot of books on different topics, but definitely there's a ton of things that you kind of roll with the punches and you sort of try to figure out, all right, how am I going to do this at this company with this sort of group of people? So, looking forward to it.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that I started this podcast, honestly, is it is hard to get the experience that you need from a book, right, or from a class. It really has to be lived in a lot of ways. So my first question for you kind of is, you proposed this topic around sequencing, what a product leader should think about when taking the helm, at the $10 million ARR stage. So before we get into kind of the what, I'm really curious to hear from you. Like, what is it about that $10 million mark specifically that makes it difficult? Like, is it an inflection point in the company's growth for a particular reason?
That's a great question. It's more of a kind of, I've seen a lot of organizations and I've noticed a lot of organizations tend to go through that inflection of, all right, the old ways are just not working out and we need to change. There's certainly companies that go through this sort of scaling journey a bit earlier. There are certainly companies that go through it later as well, but it's usually at that sort of 10 million annual recurring revenue that you start to see, hey, there's some product market fit. We have some traction. There's some markets that we serve well. We deliver value to some segments that actually love our products. But yeah, it's definitely not a hard rule, but something that usually around that mark that you sort of start to see.
And are there particular challenges that are, that really start to crop up from an operational standpoint, a personnel standpoint? Like, what are the kind of the symptoms that you'd see, even if it's not necessarily precisely at 10 million, like what's the signs that you have hit that inflection point?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, early in the intro, you were talking about, hey, you're kind of like sales led and you're somewhat implementation heavy and so on. So some of the things to just look for is your cost of customers just starts to go higher and higher. Every sort of new customer that you add, you start to see actually the pressure on all the supporting organizations, whether it's implementation, whether it's product, whether it's engineering, it just starts to amplify. So you used to be able to operate in the way of, hey, we'll sign a customer. They've been compelled by the value prop that we're offering them. And that was okay because you were kind of scrappy and you're sort of trying to find your way through. But now you're at this stage where I like to say you're one of the things that you cared about as a founder pre this kind of moment that I've kind of called 10 million, but it could be a different moment. The opportunity for you is one of the most important things. You're sort of trying to keep the lights on. But now opportunity cost actually starts to go way higher. Demands of one segment or one customer now starts to really put a ton of pressure into where you're going to be taking the product or which other customers that you already signed demands you're able to actually meet. So it really is for the founders, for the C-suite, for the leaders to kind of take a look back and for them to say, here's how we're operating. Here's who the type of customer that we're signing. How, if I was to double this, change nothing else, but twice as many of everything, what does that look like? 3 times, 4 times as many as this, what would that look like? And that was really the challenge that I was dealing with at Enable, which was growing very, very quickly, roots into bespoke development. And there was product market fit, but there was a real heavy, aggressive sales push to whoever wants this kind of ancillary problem solved, we can solve it for them. And we were growing at like 400% year over year. So putting all of that together really, more than anything, needed a change in the culture of the organization, and first recognizing that there is a challenge and then having the urgency and the sort of drive to continue to push through it. So those are like some of the critical things that I would look for.
Yeah, you mentioned something which definitely struck a chord with me, my own experience at working at Series A companies. I often describe as kind of going through the existential crisis. Everything you're doing on a daily basis is the company going to exist tomorrow, next week, next month, whatever it is, right? Which obviously at companies at a larger scale, you have certainly less of that pressure. It doesn't necessarily completely go away, but it does lead to very different activities and experiences. You mentioned cultural change at the end of that. And I mean, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but culture, certainly at a smaller stage company like that, is often dictated is a strong word, but defined at least by the founder, the CEO. So how much of this cultural change is things that a product leader can enact without necessarily having to change the way the product, or I'm sorry, the founder thinks, versus how much of this is really dependent on the founder embracing a new mental model or a new cultural model?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna be curious about what your experiences have been. I have not seen, as long as you have the founder as like a, let's say, CEO. If the CEO is not on board, it's not going to happen. Now you can kind of work around and make alliances with the CRO, with the CFO, and a chief operating officer, but you need the CEO to be on board. And this cultural shift, that's why it's a lot of companies fail, is the CEO is kind of in the mentality of hey, I'm the main salesperson. I'm in the, at that stage of the organization. All I've known, all the success that I've known has been possible because I was very invested and I was in front of the customers and the prospects, and I know the market exceptionally well, and I'm trying to sell the software. All very, very valid things. There was a phrase, there was a term I heard from someone which really resonated with me. He told me it's really about refounding a company at that stage. So a lot of founders, they need to sort of shift their mentality that they're, and should really say, I'm refounding my own organization with new people, new processes, and so on. And that's a phrase that really sort of stuck with me over the years.
That's really interesting. That also dovetails to me one of the big, I think applicable lessons that I learned from my past experience, particularly at Amazon, was you have to be willing to put yourself out of business, is how I always kind of phrased it. I think you're saying a very similar thing, right? This is not necessarily related to the competition of other companies are going to come along and do what we're doing better, so we have to get ahead of them. But rather, we're just playing a different ball game now, right? We're at a different scale. We have different pressures, different needs. I love that concept of refounding. Can we talk about a little bit how that played out in your personal experience? I mean, we talked a little bit about joining Enable. Maybe that's a good example for you. But what does refounding look like in a real experience you've had?
Yeah, refounding. So when I joined Enable, I'll sort of paint a little bit of the picture. As I mentioned, the company used to be a dev shop, and they built out this sort of niche finance, back office finance solution, which solved a legitimate problem. And then the founders realized there's a real market demand for this. This is a real market problem that it's solving.
Mhm.
So the company had really grown organically from going around to different manufacturers, distributors who were sort of the target market and offering up the solution. But because of the sort of like a dev shop background that the company had, that the founders had, it was always all right, at a high level, we know what we're solving for and what the market needs, but what is it that we build next? Where do we go from there? From a product perspective, was always kind of like on a customer by customer basis.
Mhm.
So the company always had a very robust and inspiring company vision, but it didn't translate into, there was no product vision, there was no product strategy.
Mhm.
So one of the very early things that I started to focus on was really kind of bringing in some of the key leaders into a conversation and saying, we need to set a boundary around what this product is. We can't be everything for everybody.
Mhm.
So why don't we work together and figure out what this is? So I wrote a Substack article about the steps involved in a framework involved in what I went through at Enable and at Fix. And really it starts off by, as a product leader, do you have a view into
Mhm.
what this should be, right? Do you have a vision that is validated based on market feedback, based on what you're hearing from the customers and so on? And the second step is integrating leaders, like you mentioned as well.
Mhm.
So, does the CEO see themselves in this vision? Does the CRO see themselves in this vision? Does the CFO see themselves in this vision?
Mhm.
And what I'm advocating for here is not hey, we're going to bring a committee together and sort of agree on something that really will end up looking like nothing.
Mhm.
No, it's as a focusing agent, which product leadership always is supposed to be. Are you bringing in something that each of the departments can see how their roles and how their roles are supposed to evolve can support that so that the company can be successful? So integrating leaders is a key step in that process. Then, through different conversations, market feedback, and so on, we came up with a product vision statement that actually was able to put like a box around, here's where we are, and everything outside of it
Mhm.
is out of our focus area. But and then you can sort of build a product strategy around it. But that's the easy part of the story. How are you going to make sure that a large sales team and a growing sales team, if you're 10 million growing rapidly, you have
Mhm.
a lot of salespeople in
Mhm.
B2B SaaS, especially if you're selling to enterprise? How do you make sure that they kind of maintain on message? And how do you make sure that it's not a destination that you, just because you have a product vision statement doesn't mean it's okay, we're done. No, it's
Yeah.
an
Right.
ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the work is maintaining it, nurturing it, making sure that it changes.
Mhm.
And genuinely, that's the hardest part. That was the hardest part for me, because we touched on cultural change.
Mhm.
Um, the organization that I had joined, there was a lot of people that had been there like 15 years.
Mhm.
So how do you kind of come in as a bit of an outsider, no real view into the market, or kind of no background into the market, I should say?
Yeah.
And now you're telling them, hey, no, we're not going to do all those other things, but we're going to sort of focus on that. But showing some wins up front early on really helped drive the message that, look, we said we're better for this segment, to this problem statement. And look, our win rate is
Yeah.
significantly higher for this problem and this segment. And this is a big problem and a big segment. So why don't we just focus on that? And yeah, again, it's not a destination, it's just an ongoing journey.
Yeah. Several things you said there that I'd love to dig more deeply into. But first off, I talk to a lot of founders and CEOs, who are looking to hire fractional CPOs or related roles, and often they articulate themselves in a way that's along the lines of, I know exactly what I want, right? I just don't have the bandwidth, or I don't have the whatever it is, the product skill to translate it into a document that my engineering team can actually implement, some aspect of it. But they're coming at it with a perspective of they have relatively absolute clarity on what they want, and they're just looking for somebody to make it real, right? What I'm hearing from you though is come up with your product vision first as a product leader, then bring the CEO on board, find ways to to meld your visions together, but create yours independently rather than viewing it as coming in and just implementing what they deem to be their product vision. Is there a tension there, and if so, like how do you navigate that with with CEOs, with founders?
Yeah, definitely. I think every product leader should have their own opinion grounded in real market feedback and market trajectory and customer feedback and so on.
Mhm.
And there will be tension. The thing that changes for CEOs and founders in sort of like a early stage Series A-ish kind of moving to Series B, and that's around the time that I actually joined Enable, is they used to be at least the closest to the market,
Mhm.
sort of proximity to the problem statement, let's say. And as the company is growing, yeah, you were like 80 people. Sure, you were talking to 20, 30 people a week that had this problem. But as now that you're 300, 400 people, you're still talking to, you might still be talking to 20, 30, but where the rest of the organization was talking to 50, maybe, now the rest of the organization is talking to like 300, 400, 500.
Mhm.
So the proximity to the problem definitely becomes further for founders as the company is scaling. What I have found is founders who are product centric, at least, or they have an eye on the product. I would be surprised as a product leader to come into a situation like that, like we mentioned, which is, hey, here's what I'm thinking the product vision should be. After all, you own the product vision as the chief product officer.
Yep.
To come in and push something that is vastly different than what the CEO or the founders have thought in their mind.
Mhm.
But really, the tension sort of that I had seen starts to come in from when you sort of try to narrow the focus and why you try to narrow the focus. For example, the problem that we were solving at Enable was prevalent at every segment of the market. Whether you're an SMB or mid-market, if you believe that mid-market exists, and there's a lot of people that say it doesn't anymore,
Mm.
and then enterprise and sort of large enterprise and so on. So as somebody who is putting yourself in the sort of founder's shoes, try the mindset, which is grow revenue, grow revenue, grow revenue, so that you can show more ARR, and then you can have the next raise and kind of become like this big company.
Mhm.
Coming in and saying, listen, SMB is sure the problem is there. Yes, there's a ton of companies in this segment. However, the lifetime value of the customer is pretty low for us because implementation, for example, is costly or cost of acquisition is higher. And these are metrics that a founder may, at that stage, may not have had to really think about.
Mhm.
So really kind of coming in from a position of facts and from a position of not opinions really, because you're really talking to somebody, this is like their baby,
Mhm.
right? Like if you're at that company, there is a reason you're there. They found some success. They've solved problems that were real in the market. I think it's just being considerate on that you're talking to another person, another human being who has a lot of opinions. And how do you steer those opinions and finding what it is that that moves them? So for me, it was, and I had degrees of success. There was definitely things that I did incorrectly that going back I would fix. But
Mhm.
for me, it was not just data, but the narrative. It's like, how can we tell the story? So I would try to present data, but I had a very narrative focused leadership. And it's kind of coming in with a story as well. That certainly helped than just being numbers focused and so on.
Yeah. And you mentioned previously coming into a company where there's a rich history, probably some significant cultural norms that have been more or less baked in over 15 years, as you said. Uh, my experience coming into similar situations, I'd love to hear if this was yours as well, but it's often not that difficult to identify, what's going wrong at the company, what are the fundamental root causes of it, and often, I think you could propose some very plausible solutions to those root problems fairly quickly, after a month or two of being able to dig into, what's going on at the company. The hard part, which I think you alluded to as well, is kind of the cultural aspect, right? How do you do that in a way that, respects the culture that they do have? That's not just coming in and saying, I'm going to rubber stamp, big tech culture or whatever worked for me last onto this company and try to, force you into that mold. Figuring out like, yes, I understand what the issue is, but what's the almost bespoke solution look like at this company in a way that, gets people on board rather than threatens them? Seems to be one of the bigger challenges, right? Particularly when you're coming into a space where you may not have, a ton of authority based on previous domain experience or whatever it may be, right? I'm curious to hear about kind of your experiences there. You mentioned also, doing some things wrong that you'd want to go back and correct. What has been your experience around that of being able to take what apply it to a company, identify what should be addressed, what should be fixed, largely speaking. How do you differentiate between oh, this is a unique cultural quirk versus this is truly a problem that needs to be solved for this company and they need to operate differently?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. In any sort of cultural shift that you try to make, it's always there's a podcast I keep thinking about all the time. It's
This
called
one.
it's this one, but there's another podcast that I think about all the time. And in this scenario, which was really an episode on change management.
Mhm.
And I cannot stress enough how critical it is for anybody in any sort of product leadership in general, but in this type of a scenario, especially, how important it is to be familiar with change management. You can come in with your frameworks and you can come in with your opinions and best practices and so on.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, you are dealing with people and people and humans,
Yep.
as wonderful as they are imperfect, whatever perfection might even mean.
Mhm.
So it's how your success is tied to how well you can help them
Mhm.
also see the challenges that you are seeing and also come for the journey that you are trying to take them on the journey of. So a lot of time gets spent, and I thought one of the mistakes that I made was I kind of looked at it from a position of authority. I'm like, well, I'm the authority on product,
Yep.
therefore this. And while the destinations were correct, and we were learning and we were adjusting and so on, I underestimated how much sort of more talking and kind of thinking like a politician and going and kissing babies and shaking hands really you kind of need to do in order to get the agenda kind of moving forward. That's not to say that I hadn't done those. It's I didn't realize how much more I needed to do.
Mhm.
So my advice here is when you think you're doing too much, double it. That's when you're actually trying to cover all the bases
Yep.
and that you're really, really clear with your messaging. Every time, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, 7 times, 7 different ways, that
Mm.
you got to message something 7 times, 7 different ways. And every time I hear sort of this message from somebody, number just keeps going higher. So I heard 13 times, 13 different ways,
Yep.
20 times.
Yep.
So it just varies kind of company by company. So when I early on when I was mentioning, hey, you need to sort of this is a journey and not a destination,
Mhm.
and that you need to be evolving this. It's just kind of keeping a hand on the pulse of the organization, just talking to as a product leader. How many times have you talked to the leading salespeople of the organization? What about implementation teams? What about finance teams, for example?
Mhm.
What are they seeing? And just sort of check and verify that the messaging, the problem you're looking to solve, the why behind the what, and sort of the place that you're trying to get to makes sense to them, that they understand it. and that they see themselves as well in it. If you're sort of starting to propose something that a lot of people just don't see themselves,
Mm-hmm.
it might be worthwhile to kind of think about am I going the wrong way potentially, or where is it in the chain that I'm kind of losing the people that I need to come on the journey with me?
Yeah, I think you said a lot of really insightful things there, honestly. One of the things I think a lot of people don't appreciate necessarily about, reaching a CPO or, distinct executive level, certainly as a product leader, but is the amount of politicking, of kind of internal relationship that it does require. It certainly, in my experience at least, sounds like yours really stops being about, what is your product depth. I think, once you reach a certain level of mastery there, in terms of being able to understand how to execute on building a product, that I don't know how much deeper you can go with that becoming, the thing that will bring you along. It's the interpersonal relationship, the ability to advocate for a good idea, even if it's not the best idea, across your peers, and make sure that you get that buy-in. But I think a lot of the learnings for me personally have been in kind of reading the social cues almost, right? Being able to come out of a meeting and say, yeah, everybody said they were on board, but the vibe was off, right? Like we're not moving forward with this. I need to go do more, more alignment in order to get this from a okay, sure to a yes, definitely, right? I think a lot of those things are hard to learn, and they become harder, frankly, as we've become, remote and don't really get together and be able to see each other's body language. So I think it's a double challenge for a lot of people.